See, I am making all things new. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Amen. In 3 days, there will be an election. And we have heard about authoritarianism and the deep state, that this might be the last election we will ever have. We've been told that the United States Department of Justice will seek retribution against political enemies, that doctors will be prosecuted for performing health procedures like abortions or gender transition therapies, that our own armies will be deployed against regular American citizens. We are afraid that our marriages will be declared invalid and that we will be singled out for persecution. Candidates have said that America's domestic enemies are more dangerous than our foreign ones. News broadcasters have told us that rather than protecting us from foreign dictators, our political leaders admire them. We see signs that the meager efforts that we are making to slow down climate change and species extinction may be undone. We have been told that the elections cannot be trusted, that immigrants are in some way unseen threats. We are reminded that the person we choose will have the power alone to destroy life on earth by launching nuclear weapons. Now, there's so much more I could say about all this, but I don't need to, because we're all getting about 5 text messages a day from politicians who act as if they know us, who talk as if they alone can save us. In 1965, 70% of Americans said that religion is very important. In our time, 45% of Americans agree with this statement. Some may say that we are becoming less spiritual as a society, but one might argue instead that we are less likely to express our spirituality through religious institutions and more likely to invest other parts of our life with ultimate value. The sociologist Max Weber had a theory about the evolution of religious life that has led to the modern world. In it, he believes there are 7 value spheres, and that these at times compete with each other. They include religion, family, politics, economics, art, science, and strangely enough, if someone can explain this to me, I'd love you to do that. He thinks that one of the main spheres of life is what he calls eroticism. Some thinkers believe that as people participate less in religion, they invest spiritual meaning in other spheres, particularly politics. So the sociologist Philip Gorski writes, "The most important form of sacrality today is arguably the political. For the populist right, the sacred is most often the nation or Christian nation or Hindu civilization. For the progressive left, the sacred is most often democracy or social justice. Nation and state, party and ideology, race and ethnicity have become sacred objects of devotion for many. And so some of our most secular friends have become a kind of missionaries, writing letters and visiting distant places, trying to convince people to vote." Now, in the time of Jesus, the Romans mercilessly demanded that subject peoples worship the emperor as a god. And the situation seemed even more hopeless than our own. But according to the Gospel of John, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. John goes on to say, "The true light which enlightens everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. But to all who received him, he gave power to become children of God." Now, the whole purpose of the Gospel of John is to draw us into this new world, into the life of God. And he writes about 7 signs that Jesus performed. The first happened at a wedding in Cana of Galilee, when Jesus turned water into wine. And the last occurs in the reading that we heard today, when Jesus returns to enemy territory in order to bring his friend Lazarus back from the dead. Now, Jesus before this, had just narrowly escaped being stoned to death in Judea for saying, "I and the Father are one." Then he gets a message from two sisters, two very dear friends, that tell him, quote, "The one you love is ill." And Jesus' friends, they can hardly believe it, that Jesus is about to go back to the place where people tried to kill him in order to help his friend. Now, the name Lazarus means God is my help. And Jesus feels so deeply moved by the grief of Lazarus' sisters, Martha and Mary, that he himself weeps. Jesus knows that bringing his friend back to life will lead to his own death. And that's exactly what happens. Later, the authorities reason that Jesus must die because by raising the dead, he will inspire the masses, who will then provoke the Romans to destroy the temple and their whole culture. The high priest Caiaphas even says, "It is better to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed." Now, the pivotal moment in the story happens when Jesus says to Martha, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And the point of this is not that Martha's believing somehow made Lazarus come back from the dead. It is that Martha's faith will help her to see the action of God that is already happening in Jesus. And that is how faith is. We trust in God first, and then we come to see the world in a completely new way. St. Augustine was an African saint born in the 4th century, and he calls this faith-seeking understanding. We say yes and give our hearts to God, and then God opens our eyes to see the divine mystery. Now, St. Augustine also said some words that are very helpful at this time of the elections, and as we hear Jesus' invitation into a deeper reality. In the year 410, Rome was sacked. And the pagans argued that this defeat happened because the gods were punishing the Romans for converting to Christianity. So in response to this, Augustine wrote a book called The City of God. Now in it, Augustine describes two cities. There's an earthly city and there's a city of God. Now these are not distinguished by their location or by their jurisdiction. One is not on earth and the other up in the sky. Instead, they are two fundamentally different ways of organizing human community. And they are distinguished by their love. The earthly city revolves around love of self, the lust for power and domination. And the city of God is characterized by the love of God and neighbor. And because God values human freedom, we find ourselves in a kind of shared territory that is occupied by citizens of both cities. Now is not a time for separating the wheat from the chaff, the sheep from the goats. We will not experience perfect justice, peace, goodness, or beauty in this life. Politicians will always let us down. So the message from St. Augustine is so simple on All Saints' Day. It is, let politics have its place, but it should never become our God. Regardless of who is elected, our God is on the throne. And Jesus, through his life and death, ushers us into another reality. And that light shines in our darkness. Now, last week we had a great time here in church. The bishop who was bishop when I was 18 years old, Bill Swing, came and preached. And afterwards, Bill Swing and Cricket Jones, who is the wife of our recently deceased dean and longtime Dean Alan Jones, the three of us went out to lunch. And now Alan only died in January, so anytime we're together, you can see there's a note of sadness on our faces. We all seem visibly upset and miss him. And so hesitantly, I asked Bishop Swing and Cricket Jones, I said, what is your most powerful memory of when Cricket and Alan got married together in France, in the Cathedral in Chartres? And so Bishop Swing talked about going into the vestry and seeing how many, like a room the size of a basketball court that had all these beautiful vestments and some from the 16th century. And they asked him what clothes he would like to wear for the service. And then Cricket described the moment she most remembered. She and Alan were perched on little chairs in front of the high altar. And as the bishop was going on through the prayers, she said that she felt as if that little chair rose up into the air 4 or 5 inches. And then as she looked out at the apse, she had the sense that all the saints who had ever been there were present with them in that moment. In her mind's eye, she could see all the saints standing one on another all around the apse, and she could feel the deep love that they had for her. In 3 days, there will be an election. But here this morning, God has already chosen. God has chosen you. And as we baptize these beautiful little children into the new life of Christ, may we too become children of God. And may all the ones we love and all the saints be present with us as we see how God makes all things new.